Coming up on Maine Challenge, two more leaders of the progressive movement in Mid-Coast Maine. Hello and welcome to Maine Challenge. Our guests today are Kate Josephs and Kelli Whitlock Burton, both activists and hardworking progressive leaders in the Mid-Coast and especially Lincoln County. Welcome, Kate and Kelli.
Thank you.
Could you, Kate, first, could you tell us a little bit about your organizations and what you've been doing in the last few years to get us to where we are today?
Okay, that's a big chunk of time, and a lot has happened. Lincoln County Indivisible is a grassroots progressive organization, freestanding, totally local, totally volunteer. We've got about 850 voters in Lincoln County that are members of this group. It's a significant group of people. And it came about totally organically in the wake of the Women's March, in the shock of the 2016 election, when people were wandering around in the streets trying to figure out what happened and gathering in groups of 2s and 3s, and then in groups of 5s and 10s, and then more and more, and then wanting to do something. And this was happening all over the country, totally organically. And two Capitol Hill staffers in DC, Leah Greenberg and her husband Ezra Levin, put up a Google Doc, which gave instructions on how to lobby your congresspeople and how to make yourself heard and how to be effective in pushing back and making change. And they wrote it for themselves and their friends. Not expecting that it would go viral and that some 6,000 groups would pop up overnight and adopt these instructions. And we call ourselves the Indivisible Movement, but we are all freestanding. We are all local and attuned to our own political ecosystem. And in our case, Lincoln County Indivisible, our mission is to support progressive policies and candidates in the face of a relentless assault on our core values. And our core values, we have a pretty long list of them. I won't read them all, but basically democratic values, free and fair elections, tackling wealth inequality, making sure people have health care, that the planet is livable, that women get control over their own bodies. It's a long list, but we are continually on the lookout for ways to support those values, protect them against assault, and help elect people that will also uphold those values.
Well,
so
great. That's a good start.
Yeah, yeah. Let me stop there.
I know there's a lot more to your story, but I want to keep going and bring in Kelli Whitlock Burton. Thank you for joining us. Tell us about your journey.
My journey is very similar to Kate's, and so is Suit Up Maine, which is the organization that I help lead. We're statewide, we are independent, we're all volunteer, we're unfunded, we are constituent based, and we're an action group, and that's how we came to be. Following the election, people woke up on November 9th, 2016, and after the shock wore off, people really wanted to get to work. They knew this was going to be a long 4 years. They knew the assault was already underway before the inauguration even happened. We sent out our very first call to action 3 weeks after the election, and we've built from there. So we also started in a Google Doc that grew very, very long. We launched a website a couple of years after that. Our mission is to help create a more informed and engaged electorate in Maine. We focus locally here in the state. We look to, just as Lincoln County Indivisible and all of our fellow persister groups around the state do, we work to advance progressive issues in legislation, policy, and electorally. We want to see more progressive voices elected to school boards, to town councils, to the legislature, to Congress, to the Senate. We have to work on that one again, and then to the presidency as well. We have, I can't recall if I've said this already, we have 5,000 members in all 16 counties across the state. Every member of Suit Up Maine either lives here now or is a former resident, grew up here, moved someplace else. I think I'll stop there too, and we can move forward, and I'm sure there'll be more opportunities for other information.
Well, that's great. I appreciate both of you joining us and keeping the flame going for this effort, because it really isn't finished. I'd also like to take this moment to introduce and bring into the show a person who is going to be joining us on occasion as a host, and sometimes a co-host. And she's been a guest here more than anyone else. It's Betsy Sweet of Hallowell, a candidate and a progressive advocate. And welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks so much. And hi, Kate. Hi, Kelly. So nice to be with you. It's an honor to be with such wonderful, amazing activists. And Chuck, it's great to join you.
Well, thanks for being a part of this, and we're looking forward to working with you going forward. I want to start with the here and now, and I realize that there's still a few things getting sorted out, but we seem to have a fairly settled view of the election. One reluctant participant in the White House, but everything else is coming more clear. And I'm wondering, let's start with you again, Kate. What is Lincoln County Indivisible and any other organizations you care to include? What are you planning for the short term and the distant future? What's on the agenda? Well,
the short term, I think all eyes are on Georgia. If they're not on the White House and its occupant and the peaceful transfer of power, I guess those are the two things that we're all transfixed by. We want to help Georgia in any way that we can that is effective. And Kelli can tell you what her group has done to find the right places to send help. So we'll be doing that. We're processing what happened in the election, and we're increasingly, I think, feeling good about it, with one big exception here in Maine. That was a major disappointment. We took Susan Collins from, I think, 68% of the vote down to about 51%, which is an enormous number, but it wasn't enough in the end. And we're looking at the lessons from that election, and we're looking at the lessons from the nationwide election, which didn't go, there was a lot of good news in it, an enormous amount. But it wasn't the repudiation, I think, of Trumpism that we were hoping to see across the board, because it was still a very large number of people who we can see are passionate about keeping things the way they're going. And so we need to look at that. This is a clarifying election in some ways, where the 2016 was a shock. This is a clarifying election in which we really see that wasn't so much an accident. There's something going on in this country that's really important to understand and to figure out how to deal with.
And Kelli, I get the feeling that Suit Up Maine hasn't lost a step, that it's on a fairly fast track to move us into the future. And there are a lot of us sitting around saying, what is the future going to look like? Can you, do you want to give us a little light on that?
Not being able to see the future, I can tell you what we would like to see the future look like. But I want to start by saying, I tip my hat to every single person in this state who worked so hard to get us from 68% to 51%. 49% of Mainers wanted to send someone else to Washington. And that's a big change from 6 years ago. This was an uphill battle. We knew it was going to be all the way, and we didn't get as far as we wanted. But I am so proud of the work that we did. And I look at the people that we elected right here in Lincoln County. Chloe Maxman is my new senator, state senator, and that is a tremendous victory. And she didn't win by a little, she won by over 500 votes. She won in almost every town in the entire county.
And she ran a very positive,
incredibly positive campaign.
We should all be proud of that. I
Absolutely.
don't Lincoln County, but I'm proud of her.
Well, and then to key off of what Kate was saying, there are lessons to be learned there. I think there's also lessons to be learned from Jared Golden's race. You know, 2 years ago, he got in with the benefit of ranked choice voting. This year, he didn't need it. So I think if you look at Lincoln County is a pretty red district, or has been a pretty red district. I think we're a little bit less red today, thanks to Chloe, and thanks to a lot of other House candidates and district attorney candidate from 2 years ago. But I do think there are lessons to be learned. Right now, I think for the next 10 weeks, I think it's safe to say most of us, as Kate mentioned, are focused on Georgia. We are Suit Up Maine is part of a national coalition called the Action Together Network, which is made up of leaders of groups like Kate's group, like Suit Up Maine, like the dozens that are across the state here in Maine. And we've been connecting with the Georgia leaders from that network, and they have given us a list of where they need help, where they need volunteers, where they need donations. We want to make sure that anything that Mainers do is a help, not a hindrance. We all know, and I think one of the lessons to take away from the Senate race is external influence doesn't always help. Sometimes it can be harmful. And we want to make sure that does not happen with Georgia. Clearly, Georgians know how to run and win a race. You know, they delivered Georgia to Joe Biden, first Democrat elected there since 1992.
Stacey Abrams did pretty remarkable.
Stacey Abrams did, but she's also very quick to note that there are many, many other organizations on the ground, almost all of them led by people of color, that have been very active and were a force. They worked together. They had a singular mission. They worked together. And I again going back to the lessons to be learned, there's a lot to be learned from Georgia.
Yeah. Betsy, you've been at you've run two very tough statewide campaigns, and you did very well and made us all very proud in both of them. How do you see the next 2 years in terms of the progressive movement and people who are sympathetic but not necessarily carrying signs and all involved?
Well, I think that, what the work that both Kelli and Kate have done, along with many other organizations, it's that grassroots work, just like you were saying for Georgia, Kelli, and I think I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this. You know, to me, part of running a campaign is the infrastructure that you build and leave behind. When you have a Washington machine, for lack of a better word, that comes in and says, we got it, we'll take it from here, A, they don't generally know the people on the ground, and B, when they leave nothing behind, so that people are left to pick up and start all over again. And I think we've seen that cycle in Maine. We've certainly seen it with the Senate races over the years. And so I think that the incredible work that you two, and again, many other organizations have done, is to build that sustained movement. And I think, I heard Reverend Warner on TV on the news last night, and someone asked him about, do you want Michelle Obama to come, and do you want the president to come, and Kamala Harris? And he said, we're honored by all that support, but honestly, I want Georgians. This is a Georgian election, and I think that was a mistake that was made here. But I'm really curious, as Kate, I loved your thought about that this is being a clarifying election. To me, I'm always looking for the path forward to how do we fix the disconnect between the Mainers and people all across this country that support all the issues that we all support. They support healthcare for everybody. They support dealing with the climate crisis. They support restorative justice. They support those things. And we see it in poll after poll and in policy referendum after policy referendum. And yet we can't always make that link. We can't always make that jump. Certainly, as a whole, Congress doesn't support that, although there's people within it. But I think it's harder. I wonder how we get better at making that link for people to say, if you support those, then here's the candidate who is going to be with you, you know. And I think that somehow that message, particularly the Senate race, but I think in a lot of messages, a lot of races, got lost. What do you think about that?
Well, so that is exactly the issue that we've started talking about at Lincoln County Indivisible. And Chloe's race is a very good example of how somebody did that. And what she did is go into people's houses over the course of both her races and spend a lot of time, and the way she explains it is mostly I just listen. She shows up and she listens. She gains an understanding of what they're really concerned about. She gains their trust, and then she helps craft policies with their buy-in. She doesn't hide her progressive values, but she doesn't walk in and say, you know, I'm a progressive, you should vote for me. My take on this is that people across the country do support our policies, but they've been taught to fear us, to hate us, unfortunately, in these last 4 years. And so if we come in with prescriptions, you know, here's what we need to do, that's not the way to win hearts and minds. And I'm increasingly drawn to the tool of deep canvassing. I don't know if you all are aware of this, whereby it's not just you knock on the door and talk for 3 minutes. You spend time listening. It's what Chloe has done. Mm-hmm. And it's what I think Stacey Abrams and those people in Georgia did. It's what the unions in Nevada did. Mm-hmm. And I think that if organizations in Maine can start coalescing around ways to train people to do that, and to go out and start building support, you know, understanding first, and then support, that is a possible way forward.
And we know that we have people here in the state who know how to do that very well. That is how marriage equality was passed in the mm-hmm. state. Yes. Through deep canvassing. It failed the first time. They regrouped, and you know, and they listened, and they started conversations. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is building up relationships with neighbors. You know, in 2018, we were able to do some deep canvassing, obviously, but it wasn't as deep or as long lasting as it needed to be. But in those conversations, some of the homes I went to would have registered Republicans, registered Greens, Independents, also Democrats. It would be a mix of parties under one roof. And everyone I would talk to under that roof, all of them wanted Medicaid expansion. And if you recall, this was after voters had approved it, but former Governor Paul LePage had stymied the progress of it by denying it funding, with the assistance of Republicans across the state. But these were Republican voters I was talking to in 2018, and I didn't bring it up. They did. They had relatives who were trying to recover from opioid use disorder, and they desperately needed medication treatment. They needed it. They needed that kind of support that Medicaid expansion would have provided, but the governor that they had voted for twice was blocking that. That listening, I think, was what we weren't able to do that this year because of COVID, and I understand all of that. In the very small bit of canvassing that we did do here toward the tail end leading up to the election, the conversations that I had would steer back to Chloe. And these would be people who had told me they were planning to vote for Donald Trump, but they were voting for Chloe Maxman because she was the only candidate on the ticket who had visited them, who had called them, who had reached out. You know, these are registered Republicans who had known the former Senator Dana Dow for a very long time and had an awful lot of respect for him, but he had never reached out to them. Chloe had. I think those kinds of conversations, we can start having those now because, you know, Chuck, you ask what comes next. Well, after we get through these next 10 weeks, what comes next is the gubernatorial election in 2022. And it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a hard fight. I think every election for the foreseeable future is going to be a hard fight. And if we spend the next 12 months listening to our neighbors, getting to know our neighbors, being trained by people who do know how to do the deep canvassing, who are better listeners than I am and know how to take in that information and then use it to, I don't want to say reformulate, but to adapt policies that we have to find common ground, I think we're going to be much more successful with getting candidates into office who will advance these issues that we know are common ground.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that I think even below that too, Kelly, one thing that I've certainly found in my work is that we're all humans, and what we really want to know is that we matter, that our lives matter, that our experience matters. What's happening behind our door when our kid can't pay for college, or when, you know, I can't get health care, or I'm scared to death that I'm going to get COVID because I don't have adequate health insurance, or I'm going to lose my job. It's, I think, part of the challenge of candidates is to say, like Chloe did, I'm that candidate. I will listen to you. I think it's also candidates who have some shared lived experience makes a big difference for people, so they can see it in you, even if you don't say it. I certainly found that with lots of single moms, you know, who, I didn't talk about being a single mom very much, but a lot of moms like got it, you know, they just, and I didn't have to say it, but it was that thing. And so I think somehow it's not even so much the issues, it's that we matter. You know, I went up to St. Agathe to the ice fishing festival. And when I was running for governor, no, it was running for Senate early on. And, you know, and if you look at the votes, I got a lot of votes up there. And it was because I went, and they were like, who the hell ever comes to St. Agathe in February and, you know, and listens? All I did was sit in ice shacks and listen. And it was healthcare, it was jobs and money and increasing the minimum wage, you know, things that nationally, as Kate said, you know, they branded as something fearful, but it's actually something everybody wants, you know. So I think that it's really, and those personal conversations and that deep canvassing is really, you know, and I think it's shifting, and Bernie tried to do this, but shifting from the I to we.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very simple idea, but yet it's very profound. And I found when I was running for office how easy it was to fall into the frame. And I have to say, this happens more with male politicians than female politicians, but they will immediately pop the clutch and just start talking so that you don't have a chance to make your point. You bring up one or two lines and then blah, 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 and they just avalanche you with stuff. And it's a good defense mechanism if you're running for office, because you don't have to defend yourself, and you don't have to, you know, you can act like a real smart guy. But the way Chloe did it and the way I hear you talking about it, it sounds like it's a very striking, positive idea in the new way of going. And we only have a few months of rest to breathe before the next election gets going.
I would argue that we don't have a few months.
Well,
I would argue that as much as I would like to have a few days, maybe a week, maybe two, to rest and breathe, I don't know that we even have that. One of the things that, you know, 4 years ago, when all of our groups, not all, let me back up for a second. And there are so many organizations, nonprofits and advocacy organizations. Betsy's worked for a number of them here in Maine that have been around for decades. And they've been doing the work that the groups that Kate and I help lead have been doing for 4 years. They've been doing it for decades. And we've been learning along as we go. But 4 years ago, I didn't know how to call my US Senator. I didn't know that I could. I didn't know how a bill made it through, other than, you know, Schoolhouse Rock when I was growing up as a kid. I didn't know how a bill made it through the Congress or the state legislature. There were we have all learned on the run. We've all learned in the moment. And we want to take that knowledge and expand on it and gain more knowledge. And I think the biggest thing that we can do right now is to help people feel seen and feel heard. Mm-hmm. Because as difficult as it is for me to understand how we know that we share these common issues, and yet so many 70 million-ish people voted for someone in a party that absolutely will not advance those issues. I don't understand that, but I need to understand that. Those individuals, what we read people say is that they feel seen and they feel heard. And we need to figure out how to see them and how to hear them. even if we don't always agree with their positions. If we start with common ground, we're not going to change every heart and every mind. It's not going to happen. And I think it would be arrogant for us to assume that we should. But if we can just get dialogue going, this divisiveness that we have in this country, it's not been 4 years in the making. It's ramped up these past 4 years for sure, but this is decades in the making. And this was part of the plan. This has been part of the plan. It's part of why we're seeing Donald Trump resist the voters' decision here. It's why we're seeing the people who support him in the Senate and the House support him now, even though they know every single election official in every single state across the country, Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, they have all said there is no evidence of fraud. But you still see people like Mitch McConnell and even people like Susan Collins tacitly acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a reason behind that. They keep this divisiveness going to keep their base out. We've got to try to find a way to end that as best as we can.
I want to say one positive thing, building on something that Kelli said in passing. And to me, it's a very big point. Kelli, when you said you didn't know how to advance a bill or call your senator or do those things, most of us did not. And look at what has happened in the last 4 years, not just here in Maine, but all across the country. Millions of voters have woken up to the fact that they have to stay engaged. You can't just vote and go home. All of those people they're not going anywhere. We're all staying on the job, keeping our eyes open, learning on the run. And I think that's a very bright spot. And it's not just, my Indivisible group and many across the country, we trend older, we trend female. But look at the generations that are coming behind us. I mean, particularly the under 30s who grew up with school shootings and who are looking at the earth melting on their watch. They're not going to stop. Nothing is going to stop those guys. And I think we should be very encouraged by that.
And I think that I agree with you, Kate, 100%. And I think one of the things that I hear, Kelli, in what you're saying, and I think that I've found common ground, ironically, on the right and the left, is the sense of betrayal. That we have an economic and a political system that has betrayed us. And when Trump supporters that I speak to say, I feel seen and heard, what they feel is that Donald Trump feels as betrayed by the system as they do, which seems ironic to me since he's, and even now in this election, that's why I think they're holding on so tight. It's like the system, we don't know how, but somehow it's betraying us. People on progressives also feel the system has betrayed us. The political and economic system that's failed to deliver healthcare, that's failed to deliver any dealing with climate change, that's failed to deliver on addressing income inequality. So I think a common ground is that we sense this sense of betrayal and we feel it. And I think that that's a place to say, okay, we all feel like this system isn't working for us. Now where's common ground on how we start to fix it? And
how we move forward is all of it. And who knew we could use up this much time in just talking, but I appreciate all of it. We have to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Kate Josephs, Kelli Whitlock Burton, and welcome especially to Betsy Sweet, who you'll be seeing more of from time to time as we go forward. And we really appreciate your audience on Lincoln County Indivisible and Lincoln County Television and all the billions out there on YouTube that hang on our every word. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll wrap it up. But we do appreciate your coming, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks to Kate and Kelli for all the work that you do.
Same to you. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.